Welcome, everyone, to another Prevent Connect podcast. This is Tori Vandelin with Prevent Connect. And today's conversation is going to be really, really great. October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and we are super honored to have Arlene and Casey from the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence joining us for this conversation. Before we have Arlene and Casey introduce themselves, I have my wonderful co-host and colleague Ashley with me today. Ashley, how's it going?
Hi, Tori. Things are going well. I can't believe that it is going to be October. I'm still trying to figure out how that is happening. But I'm very excited to hear from Arlene and Casey.
Yeah, same. I really cannot believe it's already October. Blink and the summer was gone. But that also means it's time to shift our energy and attention to Domestic Violence Awareness Month. Can you both introduce yourselves, your organization, and your roles?
Sure. I am Arlene Vassell, like you mentioned. I'm the Vice President of Programs, Prevention, and Social Change, again at the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence. And I provide leadership to our Domestic Violence Awareness Project and our Prevent IPV project as well. Casey?
Yes. Hi, everybody. I'm Casey Keene. I'm so happy to be with all of you today. At the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, I am the Director of Programs and Prevention, which means that I get to be involved with so many of our special projects and key initiatives, including these two intersecting projects that Arlene mentioned, the Domestic Violence Awareness Project and Prevent IPV. And we'll talk more about how we're really being intentional about emphasizing the prevention aspects during October and beyond.
Thank you both so much for being here. And I really appreciate what you had said about emphasizing prevention. I know sometimes we try to throw it in the acronym of Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but I don't know. I just feel like DVAM rolls off the tongue so much better than DVAPM. But knowing that prevention is in there is so great. This isn't the first Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So can you describe what is the history of Domestic Violence Awareness Month? How did this come to be?
Tori, I'm so glad for the reminder, Domestic Violence Awareness and Prevention Month, right? So I think we can, especially in this podcast and just in our general conversations, we can remember the P because it's really critical, even though like Casey said, we're being intentional. I think we also want to expand the narrative to include prevention for individuals that may not recognize that we're being intentional. So thank you for that reminder, Tori. So history lesson. I can start with, the Day of Unity that was initially conceived by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence in October 1981, and then take us on a journey to the Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisory Group, who for NRCDV provides leadership and kind of guides our themes and the theme that we'll talk more about later, and all of our domestic violence efforts. So with that being said, again, the National Day of Unity was held in October 1981, again by the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, with the intention of connecting advocates across the nation who are working to end violence against women and children. In October 1987, the first Domestic Violence Awareness Month was observed, and it just happens to be the same year as the first National Domestic Violence toll-free hotline. In October 1989, U.S. Congress passed Public Law 101-112, designating October of that year as the National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. In 1995, my apologies, NRCDV convened several national domestic violence organizations with the intent to launch a new effort to support domestic violence programs awareness and education efforts for Domestic Violence Awareness Month. This collaborative effort became the Domestic Violence Awareness Project, that is currently comprised of survivors, advocates, activists, preventionists, local and national organizations, with a focus on raising awareness about domestic violence, and also provide strategies and tools to prevent domestic violence. So again, going back to the reminder from Tori that Domestic Violence Awareness Month is not solely about raising awareness, but it's also being intentional about creating providing strategies and tools with the intention of preventing violence from happening in the first place.
Yeah, no, it's great, Arlene. And I'm thinking too with that date, 1981, in my head, that it's been 40 years now that, domestic violence awareness observances have been happening on the national level. And it's interesting to reflect back that, if the original intent was on connecting and celebrating the work of advocates, and still today, we lift that up when we observe Domestic Violence Awareness Month, is valuing, the connections between advocates who are doing this work and continue to do this work. So yeah, it's a long history. And at the same time, while some things have remained the same, I see such an evolution in the messaging, this intentional evolution from awareness to action, really moving people to action. That we've seen emerge from the Domestic Violence Awareness Project.
And I think something that I want to add, while we're talking about raising awareness and we're talking about providing strategies and tools to prevent domestic violence, I also want to acknowledge that at NRCDV, we also recognize Domestic Violence Awareness Month as a time to remember and mourn the lives lost due to domestic violence, sexual violence, and other forms of gender-based violence and oppressions. We also at NRCDV celebrate the resilience and strength of individuals that have survived senseless acts of inhumanity. And we'll talk more about that as we talk about our focus, on advocates. And then we also want to honor the courage and legacy of advocates and preventionists who toiled before us, right? We stand on their shoulders. So we use this time to acknowledge that as well. And like Casey said, the connection is really key during Domestic Violence Awareness Month and beyond.
Thank you both for really lifting up the work of advocates and the resilience of survivors. I feel like that's really grounding me in this conversation. It's also incredible to think about the history of Domestic Violence Awareness Month and to look back at that evolution and really kind of see how the conversations have advanced the work to prevent domestic violence. I think that domestic violence and preventing it is a really complex issue. There's just like so much to learn, so much to know, so much to kind of grapple with. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why each year has a theme that we can really focus our conversations around. So I'm wondering if you all would share about the theme that NRCDV is highlighting for Domestic Violence Awareness Month in 2021.
We are really excited for DVAM 2021 because we are turning up the heat on our call to action from that, we are extending from last year, no survivor justice without racial justice. We heard from the Domestic Violence Awareness Project that they are committed to continuing to lift up this message and to really, like I said, turn up the heat on it. The Domestic Violence Awareness Project is really calling on the domestic violence movement, as agencies, as individuals, and as a movement at large to really center, celebrate, and follow the leadership of Black survivors, leaders, advocates, and frontline workers. So to this year, we're really elevating and, emphasizing the call to action inherent in no survivor justice without racial justice.
And I think in addition to that, that focus, we're also being intentional about connecting our one thing messaging campaign with our messaging around No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice. Our One Thing messaging campaign was developed in 2018, again by the Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisory Group, with guidance from Athena James Brightful. And again, like Casey said, the group wants to turn up the heat on the No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice campaign that was developed in 2020, and also continue our 2018 One Thing messaging campaign. The One Thing messaging campaign, coupled with the No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice message, is being intentional about centering the lived experiences of survivors, advocates, and preventionists on the margins. It's all about changing the narrative about prevention. It's about centering the voices of those most impacted by the violence that we would like to prevent. It's all about incorporating accountability, healing, and wellness. And it's all about creating the social transformation that we all desire. So again, we know that, domestic violence is a serious public health issue that requires our individual one things and our collective one things in order to shift destructive beliefs and behaviors that perpetuate gender-based violence. So we have two going. We have the No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice, and we're coupling that with our One Thing messaging campaign as well.
Wow, No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice is so powerful. And I know just by kind of hearing the conversations that I've been in over the last several months, that it's really inspired some long overdue change in our field. And to quote you, Arlene and Casey, it's time to turn up the heat, right? We have to put some action behind our increasing awareness. And I love that you all are still, continuing and really coupling your One Thing campaign with No Survivor Justice Without Racial Justice. I'm wondering, for folks who maybe are newer to this work, or who just haven't maybe had a lot of exposure to conversations like this, if you would kind of outline for us how you all see the connection between survivor justice and racial justice.
And I want to highlight something that Casey said as we talk about the connection, and we're talking about Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I want to really be clear that this is a call to action during Domestic Violence Awareness Month and beyond, because the message really is a reminder that gender-based violence is inextricably linked to other forms of violence and oppression. Therefore, our domestic violence awareness efforts, campaigns, and messaging during and beyond Domestic Violence Awareness Month must be intentional, intentionally focused on dismantling systems and structures, right, that perpetuate violence and all forms of oppression, including racism. So again, this message is really centering the margins and is really highlighting the lived experiences of advocates, of survivors who live at that intersection and who experience the world at that intersection. So groups that are traditionally targeted, degraded, threatened, and marginalized because of their gender, and sadly, because of the color of their skin.
Yeah, that's so important, Arlene. And I feel like right now we're at this moment in time where these twin pandemics of COVID-19 and racial injustice have really illuminated inequities that cannot be unseen. And many saw them before, and many are just seeing them now. But either way, we can't ignore them, and we can't ignore the ways in which anti-Blackness is really embedded in everything, including our organizational policies, practices, and our programs, and our work with survivors, and our prevention work, which means that our work simply can't be the same moving forward, that we have a responsibility to transform our programs, and really, as you said, Arlene, center the lived experiences of survivors and advocates on the margins, especially Black survivors. I know last year, anti-violence organizations across the United States were at this time issuing public statements declaring solidarity with Black, Indigenous, and people of color and professing their commitments to racial justice. And this was important, but what was missing was the necessary internal work to actualize that and to be accountable to those statements. And so when we're talking about no survivor justice without racial justice, we're really calling on everyone to commit to fully embodying this work. And I love this quote from the Combahee River Collective. If Black women were free, it would mean that everyone else would have to be free, since our freedom would necessitate the destruction of all the systems of oppression. And so to me, that speaks so much to what that connection is at the root between survivor justice and racial justice.
Thank you for that, Arlene and Casey. I think that just is so clear. And, you know, I know you all know that at Prevent Connect, we spend so much time talking about the root causes of sexual and domestic violence, and really trying to illuminate those connections that anti-racism work is violence prevention work, and really highlighting what those connections are between oppression and gender-based violence. And I think that this theme is just so powerful because it is, as you said, Arlene, calling us all to take action. I'm wondering too, because Casey and Arlene, you both mentioned that, you know, NRCDV is doing other work around this message, no survivor justice without racial justice, not just in October, but this is really like the crux of your work. And so I'm wondering, as a national organization, how you all are intentionally leaning into this really powerful message.
And we can talk more, Casey, if you choose to, about our internal racial justice work. That within itself is a journey that we've all been a part of at NRCDV. I want to say for the last 4 years, like Casey had mentioned, it's not only about our messaging, and it's not only about how we're showing up during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but it's those internal structures, right, that we actually need to confront. The structures that continue to oppress some and not others. And so at NRCDV, we are on a journey as it relates to our internal work. External, we're like really intentional about centering the voices, leadership, and lived experiences of Black and Brown survivors, advocates, and communities in our awareness and prevention efforts. We have absolutely not arrived. We're still on a learning journey. We're still learning, right? As we go. And, we are committed to becoming better. We are committed to listening and responding to the individuals that we are striving to center. It'll show up in our proactive training and technical assistance efforts. This commitment will show up in our processes for resource development. It'll show up in our allocation of resources, and it'll show up in our public policy priorities, right? And we also have several work groups and committees that we've expanded to increase representation from the communities that we know are most impacted by violence, and increase numbers in these spaces as it relates to making sure that we're centering the voices and lived experiences of Black and Brown survivors. And these work groups and committees provide leadership to several of our key initiatives, including our domestic violence awareness and prevention efforts. So this is how we're being intentional about making sure that the individuals most impacted by the violence that we're trying to prevent, by the oppressions that have been laid bare by these twin pandemics, their voices are really present and centered in our work groups and committees.
Yeah, and just an additional reflection to offer. It was 2015 when we were engaging with the Domestic Violence Awareness Project, and the advisory group was raising issues about the need to address racism and to promote racial justice as part of our work. And we were energized and excited from that meeting. And I remember the conversation with you, Arlene, where you said, "That's great. And this is all great. But have we done our internal work? Have we done our own homework?" And that was such a pivotal question. And that's where NRCDV's Racial Justice Initiative was born. So, as Arlene said, we've been on this journey since then to really do the work, to really walk the talk. And it has been challenging and it's been transformational. And it continues. And so, I think that we are committed to, continuing this journey and to, sharing that journey with others who wish to do similar work. But yeah, just want to take a moment to say that the racial justice work at NRCDV was really born of this conversation with Arlene. So thank you, Arlene.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for that acknowledgement.
I feel so honored to have both of you on this podcast. And Arlene, I know that you are just so influential in this field, and NRCDV is, you are as a change maker. And I feel like this is just such a critical conversation, and coming at a really critical time for our audience too, to really think about, have we done our homework? Have we done that internal work? Arlene, you had said that this work of connecting racial justice and survivor justice, it's not just messaging, it's not just Domestic Violence Awareness Month, but it's confronting those internal structures too. So I think, as folks are listening, would really encourage folks to think of it as a both and, not just what work are we putting out, but what are we doing within too, as Arlene has said.
Thanks for listening. Part 2 of this podcast is available now, linked on our website.